So let's talk about gaming. So let's go quickly. Well, I'm going to go through what's going on in gaming in general for layoffs. Microsoft laid off, and this is according to ChatGPT, so it could hallucinate and say I got laid off too. We'll see what happens. Microsoft laid off 1,900 workers in its gaming division following the acquisition of Blizzard. Riot Games laid off 530 employees, about 11% of its staff, trying to get the co-founder Riot to come on. I went to their campus last Friday. Beautiful campus, reminds me of Blizzard back in the day. Like people still love working there. They have it has heart and everything. Twitch laid off 500 employees, about 35% of its staff. Yowzers. Unity announced 1,800 employee layoffs, about 25% of staff. Epic Games Fortnite maker laid off 830 employees, 16% of its workforce. ByteDance TikTok owner laid off hundreds from its Newverse gaming department. Roblox laid off 30. Snap laid off around 20% more of its 6,400 employees. Snap's not really a gaming company, I don't think. Pixelberry Studios laid off 120. Thunderlol, 100 employees. PDW, Pull to Win, 45. Lost Boys Discord, more layoffs. So, what's going on in gaming? I thought gaming was doing pretty well.
I mean, I think a number of the top gaming / financial, the sites that cover business have written really good kind of long stories about what's happening in gaming. But if you're in tech and in gaming, it's difficult not to see the parallels between both. And that if you look at the timing, two things happened that after which there were a lot of tech layoffs and a lot of gaming layoffs. I think the first thing, though, that I noticed, being in tech 20 years, it's not like there were never layoffs in tech. And some companies laid off more or less every year, right? And they just don't call it layoffs. They use one of my favorite rules ever, which is the Peter Thiel rule about every smart business has salespeople, but no good salespeople look or sound like salespeople. You just can't call them salespeople. So if you're going to be smart, you have to employ a ton of people who are doing your sales, but you just can't call them or have them sound like salespeople. And all of the best tech companies, the Ciscos of the world, the big iron companies, they laid off 5% of their staff every year. They just never called it a layoff. Mm-hmm. And, Facebook and Google have done it for years too, but they didn't call it a layoff. It was, we've reduced our contract force or we've done this. But back in the day, you never had to say that, right? A lot of your recruiters, a lot of your HR, a lot of your administrative staff were contractors or there were people brought on to help a certain project and the project was done and you churned them out and then you added more people when you had a new project. And so I think if you tell me that a company laid off 5% of its staff and that was what it did that year, I don't think of that as a layoff. And I don't think of that as an industry problem. I just think of that as they probably did it last year. You just didn't know it because they called it something else. But if you look at the amount of gaming layoffs last year, it was 10,500. This year so far, it's 7,300. But if you look at when they started in tech and gaming, two things happened. One, Elon started it. I think everybody has kind of accepted that. Elon made it okay.
Yeah.
And so love Elon or hate Elon, depending on where you are, Elon just made it so that anything any other company was going to do in laying off 45 or 50 or 500 people was not going to be a story because of what Elon did at Twitter. He laid off 80% of the staff and the company persists. And so all of a sudden Elon broke ice in two ways. He did something that was so dramatically unpopular that everybody thought he was going to explode and he didn't. And then everybody thought the company was going to end and it didn't. And so if you're a CEO and you've got a little pressure from the board or your investors to manage costs and you're running Google in the show Silicon Valley and you've got a bunch of people on the roof, get the people off the roof.
Yep.
First order of business. Why not do it? Elon made it so you can do it and it's free. So that's number one. And number two is, COVID, immediately following COVID, months after COVID, there was a massive spike in video game players and video game purchases, and that lasted for a year and a half. And so, so what happens? Tons of dumb money gets invested into video game companies. And what do people do with dumb money? They spend it dumbly. And so they dramatically overstaff projects that were never going to go anywhere and we're never going to ship and were unnecessary. And we're just seeing them pay all that back. Microsoft did this, right? When Microsoft announced its layoffs, people were saying, oh my God, nobody's going to be able to get a job. And you did the math and you said, but if you look at the number of dumb employees, additions they had the year before, they still haven't even touched that number. And so they're still way overstaffed. And this is a point that Aman Verjee made very, very aptly when he was talking about all the fat that could be trimmed out of Facebook and other companies before they really got to muscle.
So well said. I'm a big Total War Warhammer 3 fan. Creative Assembly makes that game, and they said, hey, they're like smoking crack on like cheap money, and they're like, hey, I know we do RTSs. That's our game. That's our plan. But let's go make a first-person shooter, and we'll put loot boxes and shit in it. And eventually, they got off the crack, went on to like fentanyl, and then someone put them on Narcan, and they came to their senses and said, "Wait a minute, we spent $100 million on this. No one wants to play it. Let's cancel this." So here to all that. So what do you think happens to gaming going forward? Is it going to come out leaner of this, better? That will they learn lessons from this, or is that cycle going to happen again?
Man, you would love to say you really want that to be the ending. Is that I bet they're smarter now. I bet they've learned their lessons. I bet they're veterans now. I wouldn't predict that. I would predict that, like, here's what we saw kind of through this. Some of the most notable investors in the world, like Andrew Chen, switched from I'm going to fund internet growth to I'm going to fund gaming, and all of a sudden, like you start blinking, you think like that really feels like a sign of the apocalypse. Like bad stuff is going to happen when like mom and dad and grandpa are asking how they can invest in video game companies. Like it's definitely jumped the shark, and there's going to be a reckoning. We're in the middle of that reckoning now. I would expect that to go for at least another year. I don't think it's as serious as anything other than those two things. Elon made it okay. He made it okay so that all of a sudden you can, all of the other creative stuff you had to do and you were dying from financial pressure, you just don't have to worry about that. You can just lay off the bottom 5 or 8%. And then, you overspent and you had to restaff and reorganize, and companies are doing that aptly. I don't think it's more complicated than that.
It sounds like you think this is, no one's really learned a lesson. It's going to repeat. So we're just going to have a cycle of euphoria, overspending, layoffs, trimming down, depression, deciding it's cool again, and then coming back. Like we're just going to cycle like this over a long period.
Another of my favorite, and I don't know if you like or don't like Peter Thiel, but another one of my favorite quotes from 0 to 1 was, why did people spend so much and inflate a bubble and then the bubble had to pop? Because they were dancing while the music is playing.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's hard to blame people for dancing while the music is playing. And it's hard to blame these executives of video game companies who starve their employees, and they're starving, and it's not worth anything to take a big investment when you can get it and the money seems cheap. It's hard to blame people for taking money when the money seems cheap. But again, you would have low predictability that they're going to spend that money wisely because they've never had it before and they're not good at it. And that's, you're not running a video game company because you're the best businessman on earth most of the time. There are very few who you could look to in the video game industry who persist, and they've done very well, and they've expanded when it's cheap and only in very good, predictable ways. The Valve boss comes to mind, but.
Yeah, no, good points. A couple things. We saw the same with WeWork. WeWork was spending billions of dollars, and Regus was like sitting there with a small valuation, and they were just like, what they're doing is unsustainable. And they were like calling this for like 5 or 6 years. And I know Regus got pressure, like we should take on all this debt and go buy all this commercial real estate. And then now WeWork is tits up. We were talking to Jason Fried here a day or so ago, and he said, yeah, even when we were doing well, we're seeing all these companies get money, and we thought maybe we should just go IPO. And then they look through the whole entire process. They're like, oh, wow, thank God we got Narcan. We realized going IPO sucks. Let's go private. 2 more things about layoffs. I want to talk about Sony because they laid off 900 folks. Any thoughts on that one? And then also, I hear this talk about Xbox, like they're getting rid of physical discs, they're discontinuing something. Like, I'd love to hear more about that. So go for it.
No particular thoughts on Sony other than, I think like overall what we're seeing with consoles, and we've been on this road a long time, and the road is still longer than it should be. There's just no good reason for consoles to exist other than if you're a kid, it's better getting a console than a PC because it requires a lot less configuration to play your game. But what we're seeing is PC appliances come out that are reducing the gap between the complexity of managing PC hardware and software and firmware, and then the ease and portability and like ease of use of a console. Console makers are not doing themselves any favors. When I buy a Ubisoft game on my Xbox, I then maybe have to like go in and like sign in, also create an Ubisoft account, and I can't just play with my kid. If I want to sign in a Nintendo and I want to play Smash with my kid, I buy the Nintendo, I buy the thing, and now I got to go through 45 minutes of extra download and then 45 minutes of signing him up an account and me up an account. My kid's been asleep for 2 hours and I still don't know how to play Smash with my kid. but it should be easy. It should be like going into an arcade. But that's why, as a parent, I'm afraid to buy my kids a PC because guess what? That means I now have a second full-time job is maintaining their gaming PC for what? But with a Steam Deck and a Asus ROG Ally and the 17 other competitors that have come out and that are coming out over the next year, all those things look like a Nintendo Switch and they're plug and play and you pop them up, you load up your Steam Deck profile. Most of the games work because it's a little Windows machine. It only costs $500 and you're good to go. And so if I can do that, and then, my daughter has a Steam Deck and she said, Dad, putting in this password's a bastard. What can you do for me? I just picked up a little mouse and keyboard and a monitor and all of a sudden it's a gaming laptop, but I bought it for $500 and it plays all the AAA games she would want on Steam. And so if I can do that, what do I need an Xbox or a PlayStation? So what we've seen is PlayStation is coming out with less first-party titles every year. They're not going to have any planned first-party titles until 2025. That's the only reason to get a PlayStation and not get a gaming PC or an Xbox. Xbox is leaning into first-party titles, but they got so much regulatory pressure on keeping their new software away from Sony that they just caved and said, fine, Sony can have them all. And so why do I need an Xbox? Why don't I just get a PC appliance that can play all of the Sony titles that I'm going to get over the next 2 years and all of the Xbox titles, and I don't have to worry about it?
Just real quick.
Sweep the leg, no mercy.
Like that
oh my
was,
God, the soundboard is
finally,
working.
That was such a good. When he was talking, I was just like thinking of the clips and the shorts I'm making and all this. I'm like, thank you, Jesus. So sweep the leg. Thank you. Speaking of regulatory, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Like, what the hell is going on with that whole Activision Blizzard getting acquired by Microsoft? That deal went on forever, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts in general. Go for it.
Great move by Microsoft. It's how you stay relevant when you're, third place in a 2-console race. Nobody really needs 3 consoles in a house plus a Steam account. And so, Microsoft is fighting for relevance and they, if Sony's going to war with first party titles and that makes sense. And I think it did make sense in the past. I don't see it making sense in the future. Then Microsoft had to come with similar armaments and that acquisition gave it to them. And that's why it scared Sony enough that they had to go sneak in the back door of lobbyists and regulators and try to fight the battle that way against the acquisition happened. But it happened just in the 5-year period that we think that first-party titles aren't going to be the difference in who wins the console wars anymore. Microsoft, I think Satya is really smart. I think he knows that it's not going to be about console wars 5 years from now. It's going to be who owns the GPU towers that your games are running on. Who's making the back end and the machines that you're using to play, and then who owns the marketplace for games. Right now, the marketplace is Steam. And, as a side note, there are these enablers like NVIDIA's GeForce Now, but Microsoft has already got a viable competitor to that, and they're looking down the road. And the more they can bring back end and gaming development, the more they can start, I'll just give you a hint. The next regulatory hurdle that Microsoft is going to have is Activision's going to come out with games that you can't play on NVIDIA's GeForce Now, but you can play on Microsoft's competing service. And so you'll be able to play Counter-Strike or whatever, or World of Warcraft on your phone, calling back to Microsoft servers, but you won't be able to do that on using any other service. And they'll do what Microsoft does. They'll be able to do that for 3 or 5 years before they get a regulatory call, and Apple and Epic and NVIDIA are going to say, hey, they own the entire vertical stack. They made the game. They're selling the game through their marketplace, and then they're selling you the subscription where you have to use their back-end PCs if you want to play it on your Android or iPhone device, and nobody else can compete with that. But again, they're going to get 5 to 7 years of run out of that, and they're very well positioned to do that. And so, yeah, I think, I think Sony's at a little bit of a crossroads right now. They've sold double the consoles that Microsoft has sold in the current gen. But they're both not coming out with a new console anytime soon, and Nintendo's coming out with a new console at the beginning of next year. So their console sales are going to slide. They don't have first-party titles coming out this year. There's no good reason to buy a PS5 unless you really want a game that came out 2-3 years ago.
So I told you all in the beginning of this episode, join his Facebook group. God damn it! I mean, what more? Do you want me to go to your effing computer and type it in to join his group? Give it the name again. Sorry, Metagame.
It's Metagame. It's very easy to remember. It's public. I think it's easy
free.
to join.
It's fantastic. Join.